This is the Crowdcrux Crowdfunding Podcast with Sal Brigman, where we cover everything you need to know to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign. We speak with proven entrepreneurs who've raised money from the crowd and want to teach you how to do the same. Stay tuned because we're about to reveal how to launch your dream project. With your host, Sal Brigman.
Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. If it's your first time tuning in, my name is Salvador Brigman, and on this podcast, we talk about crowdfunding, we talk about Kickstarter, Indiegogo, raising money on these different platforms. And today's episode is a little bit different than at least the recent interviews that I've put out. And that's because this episode is pretty much exclusively focused on equity crowdfunding. So what is equity crowdfunding? Equity crowdfunding, you think of, let's just say Kickstarter, Indiegogo. When you give money to a campaign on one of these websites, you are getting access to exclusive perks and rewards. It's kind of like a pre-order in some ways for a product. You can be the first one to own a new cool technology gadget that comes out, or you can be the first one to own a board game or something like that. So you're supporting a campaign. It's kind of like more of a donation, if you want to think of it that way. It's a pledge. With equity crowdfunding, instead of getting that product, you are actually investing in the company. Think about that for a second. Someone puts out a campaign, you can actually become an investor or a shareholder in that company. It's really cool. It's very innovative. I can see it in the next 5 years becoming way more popular, and even replacing things like angel investing. You know, I don't know if it's ever going to replace VC investing. That's more of a juggernaut there. But angel investing, I can see a lot more activity moving towards equity crowdfunding. So it's a really cool thing that's happening in the crowdfunding world. And actually, the product that I had on the podcast today, you can, if you want to, invest in this company, invest in this product for a minimum of $200. I think that's so cool. Like, I've never seen that happen before. This is something that's only in the recent years been available. So it's very cool. In my interview, we're going to be talking about his strategy, how he put together the product, how he's marketed the campaign, got the word out, like all that kind of stuff, the traditional stuff I love to talk about. But this isn't actually the reason that I was so excited for this interview. Honestly, I'm just having this guy on the podcast because he has such a cool product. Like, the inner nerd or the inner geek in me is literally just like jumping up and down. This product is so cool, and I am not just saying that. I'll link it up in the show notes for the blog post for this podcast. But the actual product is a jetpack. Yes, it is the world's first fully functional jetpack. This is Jetpack Aviation, the first ever personal flight vehicle. Now, before you go calling me or this guy crazy, I want you to go and watch the YouTube video and watch the thing actually flying around New York. It only has, like, I think a 10, maybe 15-minute flight time, but it's extremely promising technology, and there are a lot of different applications that we're going to go into, both commercial and personal use, that I think could really transform our world. I think a lot of people who are on the cusp of technology, really pushing the boundaries, a lot of the times are named as crazy or as, having kind of a little bit out of this world, for lack of a better word. But this is actually where the innovation is happening in our society. You look at campaigns like the Oculus Rift. If you're not familiar with the Oculus Rift, this is what started virtual reality. Virtual reality has become a bigger thing nowadays. I think it's going to be really big in the next 10 years. But this campaign on Kickstarter raised a bunch of money for the Oculus Rift, and then Facebook bought the technology for the Oculus Rift. I think they paid around $2 billion, possibly, around that. And now this is actually a thing. This is like a consumable item. I can see it being way bigger in the future. And unfortunately, the people who backed the Oculus Rift didn't actually see any of that cash flow. But with equity crowdfunding, if you do support one of these projects and they end up really hitting it big, you can actually reap the financial rewards of that. And to me, that's just really, really freaking cool. The other campaign, let's just say the Pebble Watch. Pebble Watch, a smartwatch, I think that influenced Apple and many of the other players out there to begin focusing on the smartwatch marketplace. So you can, poo-poo it all you want, but these campaigns that are launching on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Start Engine, etc., they are actually driving innovation forward. They're causing leaps to go forward in technology. They're causing larger companies to take notice because this is new consumer buying behavior. It's really changing the game, guys. And I think we're going to look back on this time period, from 2010, 2011, to the next 10 years or so as being a very strong period for innovation. And a lot of that innovation is happening on Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and the sites that we're mentioning, all of these different types of crowdfunding sites. Without further ado, let's get to today's episode. David, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, man?
I'm doing really well. Good to be on the show. Thank you.
And where are you calling in from?
Actually calling in from France at the moment. I'm over in Europe meeting with some of our suppliers. Great to connect you from here.
Is that where you guys are based?
No, actually based in Van Nuys, California, just a little bit north of Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. Did you take the jetpack over there to get to France?
Yeah, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? No, we take a couple of fueling stops. Yeah, mid-air refueling would be needed.
Yeah, very true. I got to level with you, man. When I first came across your product, my mind was completely blown. Like, just the little kid in you, every single guy, every single boy wants to own a jetpack. It's just something really cool. We think of superheroes. We think of all that kind of stuff. But you actually went out there and you made this thing. That's a really, really big difference. Like, I really want to understand what made you decide to do that. How you actually put in all that time. What was the vision there?
Well, it actually started exactly the same way for me when I was a little kid and I would see these shows on TV, and then the 1984 Olympic Games opening ceremony with the old rocket belts, which is completely different technology. Lost in Space, the TV show, they had one of those rocket belts on there. I just thought, wouldn't that be amazing to be able to strap something really light and small on your back and just be able to blast off and fly around where you want? And I guess, the concept was there. It was in my imagination, but I had absolutely no money. I had no way of making it happen. So I went to did the university college thing, and eventually built up my own business, made a little bit of money, and I kept coming back to this concept of a jetpack. And in the interim, nobody had built one, but it was still sitting there as this this incredible machine. If somebody could build this thing, and I did a lot of research to see who was doing what. Couldn't find anybody really advancing the technology, so dived in myself and built up a team over a number of years. And I can tell you, we had many, many, many failures over 15 years or so. We're up to JB 10 now. And the first 5 JBs didn't fly. They weren't even controllable effectively. We couldn't get the engines to run together. But just getting out of bed every day and saying, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to find the money to go to the next step. I'm going to find the energy to go to the next step. And then you have those sort of small, you have those small wins, and you go, this is worth it. That's awesome. And then the next day, it all falls apart again. Yeah. And somehow you just keep going,
Yeah, you sort of just have to keep plowing on. Were you more of like the engineering talent? Were you the guy sort of organizing things? What's sort of your role at the company?
I guess you'd call me the sort of the roving CTO. So I'm head of R&D. I'm also the CEO. But my interest, my passion, everything, the thing that consumes me every day is the R&D process. This is a really difficult nut to crack well. In other words, to create something that, in the one instance is incredibly small, but stable enough and powerful enough to fly a human being around safely. And that I just find a really interesting and amazing problem to solve. So that's why I wake up every day is solving those little problems and getting better and better. Extending the flight time, extending the flight dynamics, and making it easier for people to fly.
What actually came together here to make this a reality? Because like you were saying, you had some failures. I'm sure those are very pricey. Those are costly too when you're putting together a jetpack. But since then, you've gotten a lot of media coverage. You've been in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, BBC. Your YouTube video I was checking out, the world's only fully functional jetpack, has gotten over 2 million views. Like, what actually came together here to now you can present this to the public?
What took a long time was the engine technology and our understanding of how to run these engines to produce vertical thrust rather than horizontal thrust. So you imagine a jet engine like on an airplane, on an airliner. They're designed to fly that airplane horizontally through the air, obviously. To change that and to have those engines produce vertical thrust so that you can fly straight up is actually a way bigger exercise than I had originally imagined, and it took years and years. I won't go into all the technical stuff, but just so that they would start properly, so that the bearings wouldn't overheat, and it's getting that right that enabled pretty much everything else to happen.
And you were fully funding this by yourself with your business. How were you funding it?
Yeah, I funded this to the tune of probably the first couple of $1 million over 12 years. Out of a business that I'd sold before, which was in the software industry in Australia. I sold out of that fairly well, and put quite a lot of the money that I made out of that into this.
Wow!
And yeah. I mean, it was a pretty big call, because at that time there was no playbook, there was no guide to say whether this would be in any way, shape, or a success, whether we could even get it to fly or not.
What I love about that too is it really shows the level of commitment that you have here. I mean, you putting your own money, your own time, your own hard work over a number of years. It just really demonstrates your commitment very clearly.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it does. There's many other opportunities, I guess, as an entrepreneur that come to me, and I've had to say no to everything effectively for the last 12 or 15 years. Put all of my money and time into this, and some people would say that's a bit foolhardy or maybe short-sighted, but I thoroughly believe that we're changing the way that urban mobility will be seen for mankind, for the whole of the future, and that's an amazing thing to be involved in.
What did that feel like when you actually had the first successful test flight? You actually see the thing working. Like, what did that feel like?
Man, that was it was actually unexpected on the day that it happened back in it was like 2013, and we'd had so many problems, and that day we just made some tweaks and took off, and everything just worked. You couldn't have dreamt for a better flight in terms of stability, and I mean, just everything worked. And I came down and just went, wow, all the engineers are there going, everybody just couldn't believe that it actually had worked. It was amazing. It's like all that money and time. Okay, cool. We're on the right track here, guys. And of course, then, we still had many, many failures after that as we tried to improve things, but at least we knew it was possible,
Mm-hmm. So you eventually then, I guess, got it to a point where you feel more comfortable bringing this to investors and really saying, hey, if you want this to become a reality, you can now invest in the projects. And I'm looking here at Start Engine. There have been over $160,000 worth of investment. You're obviously going for the $1 million goal here. Is there a reason you decided to do this versus, say, like a venture capital firm or some other way of financing it?
Yeah, I mean, every person that I have ever met or I've ever spoken to about this project, which has consumed so much of my life, just gets on board, understands it, gets excited, really just passionate about the future of personal flight. So that we thought, rather than taking it to a VC that is purely in it for the financial gain, let's look at individuals. Let's take it out to the masses of people that dream of a more interesting future. One day we don't need to be on the 405 stuck in this series of lanes of traffic. There's all this three-dimensional space above us that we're making no use of at all. Mm-hmm. And people get that, and that's why we decided to go crowdfunding rather than VC.
I think what's so wild about it too is you can look at certain inventions like this and you can think, wow, that's crazy. Like, we'd never be able to fly like that. But you go back in time, no one actually thought you would have this phone that can do so many different things, access the world's information in the palm of your hand within a few short years. Like, the pace of technology is changing so fast, and soon this is going to be a reality.
Exactly. And then, look at drones. If you go back 15 years ago and you said that you could have a drone that only cost a few $100 and it would follow you around as you were on your kayak or on your mountain bike or something, and it would track you in front of you, behind you, it would do exactly what you wanted to do, people would, they'd laugh at you. And you say, all of the electronics fit in a matchbox. They'd go, what? And it's that progress in accelerometers, 3D gyros that are now based, in every smartphone you have these things, and the cost has just been driven down and the reliability has been driven up so much by the smartphone. The take-up of the smartphone is it's made things possible for us. And of course, the other big thing is the emerging improvement in battery storage, battery density, storage capacity. That's a huge thing for not just us, but anybody that's working in the electric aerospace field. Because 200 watt hours is interesting. If you get to 400 or 500 watt hours, then you start talking about real capacity, real capability in electric aircraft. And we don't have to. The great thing in terms of us going to investors is we don't have to win money or investment to further that, because there's these giants like Elon Musk with Tesla and what have you that are already spending billions of dollars in improving that technology. Mm-hmm. And then there are companies like us that can reap the benefits of that.
This is such an exciting time to be alive, because it's kind of like, if you were to go back in time, you have the Wright brothers, they're doing their first airplane. How cool would it be to be an initial investor in that company? Like, that would be so cool to be able to say you participated in this whole new wave in history. And if I understand correctly, so Title III of the Jobs Act, what you're raising money under, can everyone invest? Are there any limitations on that? What is the minimum investment here?
The minimum investment is effectively $200 for us. We've priced our shares at $6.63. And, there are some caveats around the sort of money and assets that you should have as an individual to invest. But you'd be surprised. Most people, most people that have had some success in their life, have a good job, etc., can invest under this kind of arrangement.
Okay,
it really has massively opened the doors to people that want to take advantage of early stage companies and to entrepreneurs. It's completely changed the way that entrepreneurs can look at raising funding, raise funds.
We'll be sure to include a link in that for the podcast on the blog. But I'm looking here also at the video. The video is just really cool. Like, you have to go and check out the video for the listeners. It's just phenomenal to see this guy flying around. What is actually like the flight time for one of these?
It depends on the pilot weight, but up to about 11 minutes at the moment. And it may not sound that long, but this thing will do well over 100 miles an hour. So you can actually go quite a long way in 10 minutes or 11 minutes if you're doing that kind of speed. Mm-hmm. And that's JB10, JB11 that we're working on now could potentially get up to 15 minutes air time, and then our electric flight version at 400 watt hours, battery density. We could be talking about more than 25 minutes flight time.
Very cool. Wow, that's pretty impressive. I recently bought a drone, the Hubsan. It's like maybe 20, 25 minutes flight time, and the first question I was getting from like a lot of my friends is like, well, it's cool. Like, it's fun to fly this thing, but like, what can you actually do with it? And I had to go through all the different applications from my YouTube videos, like all these different things. Like, oh, okay, I can see. In terms of the actual jetpack, so aside from being a baller, like flying around, looking really cool, what do you enable or what do you think of the applications for society here?
Okay, so the one of the most important ones that we're working on right now is the contract that we have with the U.S. Navy, and it's more for an extraction type role, because there is literally no other aircraft in existence that is so small. Okay, so if you're looking for a machine that is incredibly small but at the same time can lift a person, that's where we come in. Okay, so if you wanted something that could extract a person with their gear that could hang around for like half an hour, then that's more a helicopter. But if you want to drop something that's like a suitcase into somebody that needs to get out, then that's where we come in. So we're putting a lot of time and money and effort into that kind of emergency extraction role, where it could either go in under its own steam autonomously, or it could be dropped in from an aircraft and get somebody out of a position of danger.
Okay.
So that's what we're spending a lot of our time and focus on at the moment.
So it seems like the business model is going to be more business to government at first. Do you ever then? I mean, I was looking at the price. I think it's like $250,000 for one of these setups.
Right.
Do you ever think that that's going to get lower for the average consumer, or even for businesses in any way?
Yeah, I think it will. I think it's the old market economies and economy of scale. The more work we do with governments, military and paramilitary organizations, then the more we get tooled up for production, the more volume that we're producing, and that will bring down the cost, not just for them, but for other end users. Now, whether that's a turbine version in the end, or an electric ducted fan, or electric prop-driven craft, I'm not sure where that'll be in 3 years' time. But we will have models available for the general public. But we know that we need to be able to bring the price down to make that attractive, and we also need to get it. We also need to get it available to people under sort of an FAA categorization that everybody understands. And the FAA and the government are just now getting their heads around drones. So you imagine that you bring a turbine powered jetpack to them. We're working through that now with them as well. At the moment, we work under Part 103, which is the ultralight category. So no license required. Okay, but as the capabilities are extended, the flight time is extended, etc., it'll probably fall outside of that category, and we'll need to develop with the FAA a completely new category, just like the unmanned aerial systems have had to.
One of the big things that I've noticed from doing this podcast, interviewing hundreds of people, I always get feedback because many of the listeners in the audience are really good on the technical side. They've worked hard, they've made a product just like you. They understand the engineering and the mechanics. They really like new products, etc. Where they struggle is actually conveying that message to the public and actually marketing that. So I think they would really appreciate if you could share any insights on what's worked for you in terms of marketing this campaign, getting investors, getting the word out, what has been most profitable for you, what's been worked best for you. I want to take a second to introduce you guys to my friends at Flash Funders. These guys are super committed to helping entrepreneurs and the crowdfunding community. They're the first equity crowdfunding platform that will let you manage and execute your entire seed funding round online. You can check them out at flashfunders.com. That is FLASHFUNDERS.com.
Sure. And that's we fall into that category as well. In the end, most of us are engineering-focused guys, either aeromechanical engineers or computer engineers. And we spent many years in the bunker skunk working and building something. And then when it worked, like literally we hadn't thought about how do we tell the world about this? And so, look, we took, I guess, a fairly old school approach in doing the flight in New York around the Statue of Liberty, which is it's a PR stunt effectively. But having all of our ducks in a row behind that, as far as having a decent website that explained our story in a way that the average person could understand. So not getting really bogged down into the detail, because it's there's a trap there. We know our tech so well, and we get so involved in it that you have to explain really what the user case, how does this improve life? What does this do? What's the end use for this to get people excited? And I've got to admit, even I wasn't that great at that. And we did engage an external marketing person that had done a lot of work in this sort of field, and they were able to help us to shape the marketing story, that sort of elevator pitch. What have we really produced? Who are we? What do we stand for? So people need that. They need that to be able to communicate internally and externally.
Mm-hmm. Going forward, then, do you plan to reach out to any influencers? Do you plan to do Facebook ads? Do you do any email marketing? What do you think you're going to be focusing on to get the word out here?
So all of the above. Excuse me. We've got a fairly large email list, and that's critical. Anybody that's looking at getting involved in crowdfunding, you have to find a way of capturing people's emails and people's contact details. Just make it worth their while in giving you that detail, and treat it with respect. But then stay in contact with them. Tell them what you're doing. That's priceless in terms of crowdfunding. We are working on Facebook advertising at the moment, and of course, non-paid advertising, just in terms of optimizing posts on Instagram, on Twitter. If you don't know your stuff there, it really is worth engaging some people that spend their life in those areas. Mm. So even as specifically as just having one group or one, a couple of guys that will focus just on Facebook for you, because that stuff is make or break with these campaigns. Then just find ways of honestly, with integrity, of keeping people up to speed. Every time you have something new that is interesting, put it out there. Invite comment, and it don't underestimate how much effort it takes to stay in touch with people. If you're going into crowdfunding, it becomes a really all-encompassing, all-consuming full-time job, and you've got to understand that up front. But hey, you learn a heck of a lot, which is great.
That's such a different mentality too than what many people traditionally think of when they think of Silicon Valley and having to sign agreements to be able even to look at the product because it's so new age. With crowdfunding, it seems like you're being far more open about the new improvements you're making, about the technology, all that kind of stuff. I mean, even coming on this podcast, a lot of other people might wait until they have all of these different people signing NDAs before they even reveal what it is they're doing. And that really hurts their marketing. So it's kind of cool that you've noticed that.
It's a completely different way of thinking about it, and you're right. And we spent many, many years, as I said, in the bunker in Skunk Works, not allowing anybody in, cell phones at the door, all that stuff. And then you have to decide, now's the time. Mm-hmm. If we keep it so tight, this will never grow. We have to get people behind us.
In terms of the YouTube video that I was looking at earlier, you racked up over 2 million views. How did that happen? Was that organic? Like someone discovered the video you posted? Were you sending this to news websites? How did you get that many views on that video?
It was actually completely organic. It was
no way.
Yeah,
awesome.
Absolutely. Because we thought we had a good PR strategy in terms of getting the story out afterwards, and it wasn't that great because a lot of people didn't believe that we did it. That it was real. And a lot of the news, the traditional news media organizations didn't cover it. So it took off virally online, and a lot of the bloggers and the video bloggers, they got behind it and they started talking about it and, even parodying and, well, superhero flies around New York and now, you can do this and you can do that. And that's how it grew.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really big question too, because it's almost so outlandish that people just assume that it's not for real. But then I take a look at the video and you actually see the person flying around. And I look more in depth into your company and you actually see all of the work that you put in. So I can see that sort of common misconception there.
Yeah. And a lot of people just don't want to believe it because for whatever reason. But then there are a lot of people that confuse the old rocket belt from the 1960s and 1970s that is also a very, very small sort of form factor. It's a small machine with turbine-powered kerosene, kerosene-fueled jet engines that can fly for 10 or 11 minutes compared to 20 seconds. And, the old rocket belts literally used to fly for 20 seconds. And when you ask somebody, did you see that flight in the 1984 Olympic Games ceremony? They go, oh, yeah, I remember that. And you say, well, how long do you think that flight was? And they go, oh, it was like a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes. It was 14 seconds.
Wow. That's crazy. You're a really smart guy. It's clear, you have your ducks in a row. You've done a lot of work for this campaign. You've launched another company that you sold. You're a really smart guy. Looking back, would you have done anything differently in terms of either preparing for this campaign or in terms of sort of revealing this to the public or even the company in general?
I think I would have got myself educated more on some of the things we just talked about, like Facebook advertising, email marketing, and sort of non-paid for social media. Instead of relying purely on experts, you can go right or wrong with so-called experts sometimes. It's really important for you to know your own stuff so that you can then choose the people that you want to surround yourself with, the experts that you want to work with. Mm-hmm. And that's a lesson that I personally have taken away from this. You've got to know your stuff, because I'm slightly old school, and I really needed to bring myself up to speed with social media. The other thing is having a your own team around you so that you don't have to do everything yourself. Every time we go out to do a flight, if I relied on just me to be taking the video and trying to do all of the permits and that sort of thing, build your trusted core team. But I'm probably not telling your listeners anything new there. But if you don't have that, you're shortchanging yourself.
Mm-hmm. So we're basically seeing sort of the very early stages of what could be a really explosive company. A company that's growing, that's transforming, and that's really kind of disrupting the travel industry in some ways. So this is like the very early stages from what I see here. What are you planning to use this money for, and where do you see then the future going after you make this financial raise?
So really, really good questions. The money is being used for our JB11 prototype, which is our 6-engine prototype, and all the stabilization systems that need to go into that. That's the first thing. What's great about stabilization systems now is that they're a heck of a lot cheaper than 10 years ago, so we get a lot of bang for our bucks. The second thing is safety systems, because this new industry, as you say, which is going to, I believe it's going to grow massively, it typically operates at low altitudes, okay? It's going to be usually between ground level and 1,000 feet. We need ways of recovering the aircraft if there's an emergency. And that's not something that anybody or any company or any industry has focused on before, because normally if you save an aircraft, they're actually higher than that. Airplanes are flying at thousands of feet up, so parachute systems, etc., that work for them don't work for us. So we need to put money into safety systems like parachute systems, as an example, that will work in our user case scenario. So that's the key use of funds is for that and that. And the other thing is a simulator to make training a heck of a lot simpler. I'm training a couple of guys now, and if I had a simulator tool, virtual reality goggles, probably a full motion platform, that would be so much easier. Mm-hmm. And the concept there is we could actually invite people to experience it as well. So there may be a revenue component to that as well. You get to come and potentially even test our electric form jetpack on a safety tether. And then you get to use the full simulator system for the turbine-powered jetpack.
I've one more question to ask you about your journey and all that kind of stuff. This kind of stuff that gets me really excited. But I know that there are some listeners in the audience who are going to want to know this question first. So if they actually do decide to invest with your company, and for what I understand, there are 35 days left where they can get in their investment with this particular round, and you're going to cap out at $1 million, so they really have to do that quickly.
Exactly.
Where do you see then this? Where are they going to get a return on their investment? Like, are you going to plan to sell the company, IPO? Like, do you have any thoughts on assuaging those fears of like, well, I'm going to put my money in, no idea when I'm going to get it out?
Right. So there are typically two exit strategies for a firm like us. We're either acquired by a larger aerospace business, of which there are many, 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 or we IPO. And both of those exit options are available to us. I can't tell the listeners exactly what time frame that would be in, but we're all in this to see a change, a complete change in the way that we work, and in terms of we're able to move around, and we already have large organizations knocking at our door that are very interested because of the absolute disruption that this creates. So how long it would take for somebody to get a return on their investment, I can't guarantee. But obviously we work on it being sooner rather than later. And the two options are exit to a larger aerospace company or as a separate IPO.
Very cool. The last question I have for you here is, looking forward into the future, what are you most excited for? Or really, when is the point in the company where you're going to be like, wow, like we actually realized our vision? Like, what are you most excited for in the future?
When we've built the stabilized turbine, auto-stabilized turbine system and the auto-stabilized electric jetpack system, that for me will be a huge step. And there are just so many different uses for those two machines once we've created that, which means effectively that either an electric or turbine jetpack could fly into in a scenario and pick people out or payloads out, or a person could strap one on and autonomously go from one place to the other. That and the increase in the storage density capacity for the batteries, meaning a longer flight time for our electric version. Once that happens, the world changes. I mean, literally in the next 10 years, and I'm not saying that an investor would have to ride this out for 10 years, but in the next 10 years, we're going to see the world change in terms of the way that each of us can move around.
Totally. It's becoming like the Jetsons, man. Like it's wild. It's so
it
new
is.
age, yeah.
And it's happening right. It really is happening right now. And people will look back and say, wow, that was the start. The drones were the start. The iPhones or the smartphones were the start with the new sensors. And that bringing all that together, now's the time.
Very cool. Well, David, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I would love it. I'm going to give you the last word here. I would love it if you could speak to sort of a younger version of yourself who's still in the trenches now, and he maybe is considering a financial raise in the future, maybe is just enthusiastic about their business and wants to know, from someone who's now going out there and raising money, a little bit of encouragement. If you could speak to them and just share a little bit, that'd be awesome.
They've probably heard all this before, but having been involved in so many startups personally, believe in yourself, and believe in yourself. Don't take advice from other people, but there's always going to be naysayers. If you believe in your product or your service or your idea, back yourself. Okay, show your investors that you're willing to back yourself. Even if you don't have any money, back yourself with your time and your energy and your commitment and your passion. On the other side of fear, the old saying, just on the other side of fear is all of the success that you want. And we're naturally, every human is actually really, fearful of change, of the unknown. You've just got to go for it. You've just got to make that step.
Awesome. Very well said. Thanks for coming on the podcast, man. Looking forward to watch your future, watch how this financial raise goes. It seems really exciting, and we'll be sure to link it up in the show notes so people can check it out.
Cool. Thank you very, very much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. I feel privileged to have been able to conduct this interview looking at the campaigns raised over $165,000 of the $1 million goal. It's just an impressive raise, but also I think this is really cool technology. I hope you also got something out of this episode. And if you did, take a second to rate and review this podcast in iTunes. It means a lot to me. Also just great feedback from me as a podcast host, ways I can improve the podcast, etc. And if you want more episodes like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button. That subscribe button will then notify you every time I come out with a new episode, which is usually once a week. So just a very easy way to stay up to date with the new episodes that I have coming out and all that information that I'm sharing for free.